Thank you, Mr Speaker. There is much to commend in this budget, Mr Speaker. One, only need to have a look at the reductions in marginal tax rates that will drive incentives for New Zealanders to work, save and to get ahead. However, sir, I want to talk about the figures that are buried deep in this budget that no one wants to talk about. I want to talk about the $907 million, almost $1 billion appropriated, Mr Speaker, in this budget for the emissions trading scheme. Sir, and that ignores the $378 million this government's going to take in from selling permits. In essence, we've got $1.2 billion is being allocated to foresters in the current year. In less than a month, this government is going to usher in the most comprehensive emissions trading scheme in the world. We're going to expose our farmers and our exporters to costs that none of our major trading partners incur. Sir, we're going to lead the world on climate change, we're going to lead the world with our emissions trading scheme, and we're going to do it despite the fact that John Key promised at the last election he would not be a leader on climate change, but he'd be a fast follower. This government, for all its good work, is prepared to put at risk people's jobs, their livelihood, and is prepared to do that at a time when our recovery is still very fragile. From 1 July, in less than a month, all New Zealanders will pay more for their electricity, their heating, their petrol and their food. Mr Speaker, everything that we consume. There will be massive windfall profits to electricity generators, and so while some 70% of the electricity that we consume is generated from renewable sources, despite that, over 80% of the time, New Zealanders will pay a price of electricity based on the more expensive coal or gas option. And so we're doing this at a time when our own gross emissions of carbon dioxide per capita is actually less than it was in 1990. As an individual New Zealanders on a per capita basis, our gross emissions are actually less per capita. And that says nothing for the carbon sequestered by forests. And of course, if you allow for that, the reduction in our emissions on a per capita basis is even greater. Sir, this is the most comprehensive emissions trading scheme that a country can have. And so how do I know that? Well, sir, Dr Smith, the Minister of Climate Change, said so to this very House. On the 24th of September, just last year, on the first reading of the bill modifying the previous Labor government emissions trading scheme, he said, and let me quote, he said, the emissions trading scheme will be the first of any country outside Europe, and on 1 July 2010, it will be the most comprehensive by including transport, industrial and energy emissions. So by his very acknowledgement, the Minister of Climate Change is acknowledging that New Zealand's emissions trading scheme is the most comprehensive. And so much has happened, sir, since the National Party made those amendments 6 months ago. It might suit Dr Smith and his party colleagues to play down that fact, but that is the reality. And sir, it wasn't enough to say that on the 24th of September. Mr Smith repeated those remarks on the 24th of November, 2 months later. And once again he asserted that the emissions trading scheme that this Parliament passed into law was the most comprehensive in the world. So we're going to impose costs on our farmers, our exporters. These are the very backbone of our economy. And where is this money going, Mr Speaker? Well, so that is the question most New Zealanders want to know. As I've travelled up and down the country holding public meetings on this subject, I'm asked time and time again, where is the money going? Well, sir, where is it going? $1.1 billion of emissions credits is to be allocated in the current year. Of that $1.1 billion, $400 million is allocated in compensation to pre-1990 foresters. And that is for losses, sir, that we can't even calculate right now. We don't even know what losses, if any, those people have suffered, because we have no post-Kyoto agreement, we have no international agreement beyond 2012, and with the failure of the Copenhagen talks, the chance, I suspect, Mr Speaker, of having one has dropped substantially in the last 6 months. And so even if we were to have one, there's a real chance that there'll be a change in the rules. And so we're about to pay $400 million. We're about to tax all New Zealanders, charge every New Zealander more for their electricity, their petrol and their food, so we can pay $400 million in compensation to pre-1990 foresters and we can't even be sure they've suffered a loss. So let's look at what has happened since this legislation was passed 6 months ago. Copenhagen, as I said, failed to produce a post-Kyoto agreement. ClimateGate has challenged the very credibility of the UN IPC scientists and the very hypothesis of climate change. We've had record cold winters in Europe and the United States, which has resulted in a substantial reduction in public support for this type of scheme. France has abandoned its carbon tax or proposed carbon tax on transport, and then just last month Australia announced it was withdrawing its emissions trading scheme until at least 2013. So what's this national government going to do? It's going to blunder on ahead. Blinkers on, eyes focused, and ignoring totally what has happened in this world. Ignoring totally that the Minister of Climate Change got up in this Parliament not once but twice in the last 6 months, has said this is the most comprehensive emissions trading scheme in the world, sir, and this national government is pushing on, ignoring the fact that they promised they wouldn't be leaders. And New Zealanders are going to pay more for their electricity. The Treasury forecast 5%. We've already seen it with Mercury's energy price rise just last month, and Mercury Energy talked about increasing prices to reflect costs and emissions for the industry as a whole. And sir, that is Morse code, that is a signal for windfall profits. And the government will make very substantial windfall profits, sir, from this emissions trading scheme, and it doesn't even have the courtesy, doesn't even have the decency to acknowledge to the people of this country that they're going to make those windfall profits. But the Minister knows it, Mr Speaker, the Minister of Climate Change knows it, because he wrote the National Party Minority Report 2 years ago on Labour's scheme, and he actually quoted the fact that the windfall profits of the government in terms of its ownership of Mercury Energy and Mighty River Power and Meridian would be over $1 billion. Over $1 billion, Mr Speaker. Dr Smith has said up and down the country and on television, he said that 29 of the 38 Kyoto countries, developed countries, have an emissions trading scheme. Well, that's very generous of him, because those 29 countries are all in Europe. By his own admission, they're all in Europe, and 80% of those European exports are to countries within Europe. Only 20% of European exports actually leave Europe. Only 20%. How does that compare with ourselves, Mr Speaker? Well, 85% of our exports go to countries other than Europe. Our 4 major trading partners, Australia, China, the United States and Japan, don't have emissions trading schemes, and only one of the countries that we trade with in the top 10 has a scheme, and that is part of the European ETS scheme. That's right, Mr Chevelle. Mr Chevelle is reminding me that we export 15% of our product to Europe and 85% to countries that don't have an emissions trading scheme, and that's 4 times as much as Europe. Europe exports, sir, 20% of their product to countries that don't put these costs on their own economy. And what are we doing? We're exporting 80%, sir. It's an own goal, and we're going to tax people up and down the country. Sir, one of my more successful meetings was in Gore. 52 people came out to discuss the emissions trading scheme at 11 o'clock on Monday morning in Gore. Half a mile from the Deputy Prime Minister's electorate office. And what did they complain to me about? They complained about the fact that coal, they're sitting on coal fields, coal that they use to heat their homes in winter, Mr Speaker, is going up by 30%. That's not a mistake, that's 30%. Electricity might be going up by 5%, but coal is going up by 30%. And where's the money going? It's going in subsidies to the Japanese owners of forests in Southland. That's where it's going, Mr Speaker. This government is prepared to tax and put a penalty and put costs on its exporters and make it difficult for our exporters to expand, so at a time when we need them to be expanding, put jobs at risk. Why? So we can pay, in the current financial year, $1.2 billion of subsidies to foresters, and both pre-1990 and post-1990, Mr Speaker. And it's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. And members of this government know it, and I would urge members of the public to contact ministers, contact their members of parliament, because it's not too late. It's not too late for this government to acknowledge that it made a commitment to the people of New Zealand not to lead on climate change, not to lead with a world-class ETS, and not to bring in the most comprehensive ETS that Dr Smith so proudly talked about in this Parliament less than 6 months ago.